The heavy velvet box made a hollow thud as it hit the bottom of the rusted metal trash can outside the Pierre Hotel. It was a sound that cost less than a second of time, but it marked the exact moment a billion-dollar dynasty began its freefall. My name is Sarah Bennett, and I am 29 years old. To the paparazzi flashing their bulbs 50 feet away, I am the invisible daughter, the Bennett failure who manages a boring compliance firm while her glamorous sister runs the family empire. But to the Department of Justice and the 3 Fortune 500 companies that quietly retained me last year, I am a certified forensic accountant who specializes in piercing corporate veils. My family thinks I play with calculators. They have no idea that for the last 18 months, I have been calculating their prison sentences. Tonight was supposed to be the coronation, the Bennett Global Legacy Gala, 50 years of dominance in logistics and international shipping. The sidewalk was lined with black SUVs and vintage Rolls-Royces. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the distinct metallic scent of winter in New York City. Inside the ballroom, the color palette was strictly Bennett blue and silver, cold, metallic, and expensive. My father, Arthur Bennett, believed that warmth was a sign of weakness. He curated his life like a museum exhibit, beautiful to look at, but do not touch the glass. I stood at the edge of the red carpet, clutching the small package I had spent 3 months restoring. It wasn't jewelry or a watch. It was a vintage leather-bound photo album containing the original Polaroid pictures of the dusty, one-room hardware store my grandfather built in Queens. It was proof that we used to be real people. It was an olive branch wrapped in gold paper, my final attempt to see if there was a human heart beating beneath the bespoke Italian suits. I wore a cream-colored silk dress, deliberately warm, deliberately soft, standing out like a flare in a sea of navy and charcoal. I walked past the security checkpoint, my heart hammering against my ribs. I wasn't looking for a seat at the head table. I just wanted 5 minutes. 5 minutes to hand my father the album, to remind him that legacy is about where you came from, not just the yacht you bought last week. I made it 3 steps into the foyer before the wall of ice descended. Victoria Bennett, my older sister and the company's chief operating officer, detached herself from a circle of senators and hedge fund managers. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of a shark in a Versace gown. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did. She blocked my path to the ballroom doors, signaling security with a subtle flick of her wrist. "Sarah," she said, her voice smooth and low, "you're confused. The staff entrance is around the back." I gripped the package tighter. "I'm not here to work, Victoria. I have a gift for Dad, for the anniversary." She looked down at the gold-wrapped box in my hands like it was containing a dead rat. Then she stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of chilled champagne and ambition. She leaned in, turning her head as if to kiss my cheek for the cameras, but her words were whispered directly into my ear. "Look at you," she hissed, her voice barely audible over the string quartet playing inside. "You're wearing off-rack silk to a black tie gala. You look desperate. You damage the Bennett brand just by standing here." She pulled back, her face rearranging into a mask of polite concern for the onlookers. But the venom was still dripping. "Dad doesn't want your sentimental trash, Sarah. He wants winners. Leave now before I have security drag you out and humiliate you in front of the press. Go back to your little apartment and your little calculator. Leave the heavy lifting to the adults." I looked past her shoulder. Through the open double doors, I saw my father holding court. He was laughing at something a senator said, looking powerful, untouchable. He glanced in my direction. Our eyes locked for a fraction of a second. I saw him register my presence, saw him see Victoria blocking me, and then I saw him turn his back. He didn't even frown. He just erased me. That was the last thread snapped. The sadness that had followed me for 29 years evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. I realized I had been trying to buy a ticket to a show that had closed a decade ago. They didn't hate me because I was a failure. They hated me because I was the only thing real in their artificial world. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't give the photographers the breakdown photo they were hoping for. "You're right, Victoria," I said, my voice steady. "I don't belong here." I turned around and walked out. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind me, muffling the music. The cold air hit my face, drying the tears I refused to shed. I walked 5 paces to the rusted metal trash can on the corner. I lifted the gold-wrapped album, the history they claimed to celebrate but actually despised, and dropped it. Thud. I stood there for a moment, watching the steam rise from a subway grate. Then I pulled my phone from my clutch. The screen glowed bright in the darkness. I opened my encrypted messaging app and found the contact labeled Maya Press. My thumbs moved fast, typing the words I had been terrified to write for 6 months. "Execute the drop. They are all inside." I hit send. The message marked delivered. Then read. Across the street, the lights of the gala shimmered, reflected in the wet pavement. Inside, they were toasting to 50 years of integrity, but outside, on the street corner, the timer had just started ticking down to 0. They thought they had kicked out a pathetic little sister. They had no idea they had just unlocked the cage of the only person who knew where the bodies were buried. I hailed a yellow cab, slid into the back seat, and watched the Pierre Hotel disappear in the rearview mirror. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going home to watch them burn. 10 days ago, I was sitting in my sterile, beige office in Midtown when a courier dropped off a box of personal effects belonging to Sophia Russo. Sophia had been the Bennett Global internal accountant for 6 years, a quiet, meticulous woman who wore sensible shoes and never left before 7 in the evening. 2 weeks prior, Victoria had fired her for gross incompetence. I knew Sophia. She didn't make math errors. She made ethical ones. She had asked a question she wasn't supposed to ask. Because I was the family fixer for low-level nuisances, Victoria had ordered me to shred Sophia's files. But I didn't shred them. I opened the box. Inside, buried beneath a stack of dry cleaning receipts and a framed photo of her cat, was a paperback novel. It was a cheap thriller, dog-eared and coffee-stained. I flipped through the pages and a bright yellow sticky note fell onto my desk. It had no words, just a string of alphanumeric characters written in Sophia's precise, cramped handwriting. BG-server at PASSWORD 1974. Directory AV_project. It was a username and password, but not for the main system. It was for the legacy server, the dusty, outdated digital basement where the company stored archived emails and old shipping manifests. It was the digital equivalent of a storage unit in New Jersey. Nobody looked there. I locked my office door and pulled the blinds. I opened my laptop, engaged my VPN, and typed in the credentials. The screen glowed green. Access granted. I navigated to the directory labeled AV_. It wasn't an archive. It was a live ledger. My heart didn't race. It slowed down. This is what forensic accountants call the quiet. It is the moment the chaotic noise of business falls away and the numbers start to sing the truth. I opened the primary spreadsheet. The header read, Pandemic Relief Application, Bennett Global Logistics. My father had applied for CARES Act funding, $12 million in government grants specifically designated for employee retention during the supply chain crisis. The application claimed that without these funds, Bennett Global would have to lay off 400 warehouse workers in Ohio. The Ohio warehouse had been fully automated 2 years ago. The workforce there was down to 50 people. The layoffs had happened before the pandemic even started. So where did the $12 million go? I followed the digital trail. The funds arrived in the main corporate account on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, they were transferred in 3 tranches to an entity called Aspen Ventures LLC. I pulled the incorporation documents for Aspen Ventures. The registered agent was a P.O. box in Delaware. The managing member was listed as VB Holdings. Victoria Bennett. I clicked on the Disbursements tab for Aspen Ventures. The money didn't go to payroll. It didn't go to healthcare. It didn't go to keeping the lights on. Wire transfer. $3,400,000 to Highland Custom Builders. I recognize the name. They were the contractors currently installing a heated driveway and a wine cellar in my father's vacation home in Aspen. Wire transfer. $1,200,000 to Blue Sky Aviation, Victoria's private jet charter service. The memo line read, Logistics Consulting. Wire transfer. $400,000 to Prestige Marine. That was the upkeep for the yacht. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the screen illuminating the dark office. This wasn't creative accounting. This wasn't a loophole. This was federal wire fraud. It was embezzlement. It was theft of government property. And because they had used the mail and interstate wires to do it, it was a RICO predicate. Sophia Russo hadn't been fired for incompetence. She had been fired because she refused to click approve on the transfer that bought Victoria her heated driveway. I spent the next 48 hours building the dossier. I didn't just download the files. I annotated them. I drew the lines. I highlighted the timestamps. I matched the fraudulent transfers to my father's public speeches about sacrificing for the greater good. I built a narrative that was bulletproof, waterproof, and lawyer-proof. Then I reached out to Maya Lin. Maya was an investigative journalist for the Financial Times who had been trying to get an interview with my father for 5 years. He had called her a bottom feeder in Vanity Fair. I knew she would enjoy this. We met 3 days ago at a 24-hour diner in Queens, far away from the prying eyes of Manhattan. I wore a baseball cap and no makeup. Maya sat across from me, nursing a black coffee. I slid a matte black USB drive across the Formica table. "What is this?" she asked, eyeing the drive. "The end of the Bennett dynasty," I said, "embargoed until 8 o'clock in the evening on the night of the gala." She plugged it into her air-gapped laptop. I watched her eyes widen as she scrolled. She looked up at me, her expression shifting from skepticism to shock. "Sarah," she whispered, "this is prison time, real prison time. Are you sure you want to be the one to pull the trigger?" "They fired the only honest person in the building," I said, thinking of Sophia, "and they think I'm too stupid to notice. Just make sure the headline hits exactly when he starts the toast. I want them to feel it before they see it." Maya nodded, closing the laptop with a snap. Done. Now, back in the present, the taxi smelled of stale pine air freshener and old vinyl. I held my phone in my lap, the screen brightness turned down low. It was 7:58 in the evening. I opened the live stream link for the gala. The camera angle was perfect, a wide shot of the ballroom capturing the sea of tuxedos and gowns. The room was bathed in blue light. My father was walking up the steps to the stage. He looked magnificent in his bespoke tuxedo, his silver hair catching the spotlight. He approached the podium, smiling that practiced, benevolent smile that had charmed investors for decades. The room fell silent, waiting for the great man to speak. He tapped the microphone. "Thank you," he boomed, his voice rich and commanding. "Thank you all. 50 years ago, I started this company with a single truck and a promise that integrity would always be our cargo." I watched the screen, my thumb hovering over the volume button. 7:59. "We have weathered storms," he continued, gesturing to Victoria, who stood dutifully by the stage, clapping softly. "We have faced challenges, but we have never compromised our values. We have never taken the easy road." I looked at the digital clock on my phone. The numbers flipped. 8 o'clock. On the screen, my father raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To legacy. to the next 50 years. He brought the crystal flute to his lips. And then I saw it. In the front row, a man in a gray suit, the CEO of their largest banking partner, reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. He frowned. Behind him, a woman checked her smartwatch. Her eyes went wide. It started as a ripple, a head turned, a whisper, a screen tilted toward a neighbor. My father paused, the glass still hovering near his mouth. He sensed the shift in the room's energy. He frowned, confused by the sudden distraction in his audience. Then, my own phone vibrated in my hand, a notification from the Financial Times. Breaking: Bennett Global accused of multi-million-dollar pandemic relief fraud, funds traced to luxury assets. I looked back at the live stream. The banking CEO stood up. He didn't applaud. He didn't drink. He placed his glass on the table with a sharp, deliberate motion, turned his back on the stage, and walked toward the exit. My father lowered his glass, his smile faltering. It had begun. The screen of my phone was small, but the image was high definition enough to capture the exact moment the atmosphere in the Pierre Hotel ballroom shifted from celebration to suffocation. I sat in the back of the idling taxi, the meter ticking up, glued to the live stream. Inside the ballroom, the air conditioning must have been running, but on the screen, the heat was rising visibly. My father, Arthur Bennett, was still standing at the podium. He had lowered his glass slightly, his eyebrows knit together in confusion. He had expected thunderous applause. Instead, he was getting a sound that was far more terrifying. It started as a low hum, the vibration of 300 phones buzzing against mahogany tables and inside suit pockets. It sounded like a swarm of angry hornets trapped under glass. Ping, 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 vibrate. The sound grew louder, drowning out the ambient noise of the room. It was a digital chorus of judgment. The notification from the Financial Times had hit every news aggregator, every stock ticker, and every inbox in New York City simultaneously. On the screen, I saw my cousin Ethan, the only relative who had ever treated me like a human being, pull his phone from his tuxedo jacket. He looked at the screen, then looked up at the camera. He didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. My phone buzzed with a text from him. "It is a bloodbath in here. The stock just dropped 12% in after-hours trading." On stage, Victoria finally noticed. She had been scanning the crowd, looking for the source of the disturbance, when her own phone lit up on the table next to her clutch. She glanced down. I watched the color drain from her face in real time. It was remarkable. She went from flushed with victory to the pale, sickly gray of old ash in less than 3 seconds. She snatched the phone up, her eyes darting back and forth as she read the headline that I had helped write. Bennett Global Executives Implicated in $12 million Embezzlement Scheme. She didn't look at the crowd. She looked straight at my father. She took 2 quick steps toward him, forgetting the cameras, forgetting the microphones. She grabbed his arm, her grip tight enough to wrinkle the fabric of his jacket. "Dad," she whispered, but the microphone on the podium picked it up clearly. "Dad, stop talking." "What is going on?" Arthur demanded, his voice booming through the speakers, magnified by his confusion. "Why is everyone on their phones?" "It's the Aspen Project," Victoria hissed, panic finally cracking her porcelain mask. "They know about the shell company. They know about the jet." Arthur froze. The glass of champagne in his hand tilted dangerously. "That is impossible. We buried that." "Someone dug it up," Victoria said, her voice trembling. In the front row, the exodus had begun. It wasn't just the banking CEO anymore. 2 senators were hurriedly whispering to their aides, gathering their coats. A prominent hedge fund manager was already speed-dialing his legal team, walking briskly toward the exit while making a cut-it motion across his throat to his partners. They were distancing themselves. The Bennett name, which 5 minutes ago had been a golden ticket, was now radioactive. My father looked out at the sea of retreating backs. For the first time in his life, he looked small. The spotlight that was meant to glorify him was now interrogating him. He looked like a deer caught in the headlines of a semi-truck that he had ordered himself. Then, the double doors at the back of the ballroom flew open. It wasn't the press. It wasn't the paparazzi. 6 people walked in. They moved in a V formation, silent and synchronized. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering on the back. FBI. The room went dead silent. Even the buzzing phone seemed to stop. The string quartet lowered their bows. The lead agent was a woman with sharp features and a tight bun. She didn't shout. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't need to. The authority she carried was heavier than any gun. She walked straight down the center aisle, her rubber-soled shoes silent on the plush carpet. She walked past the stunned investors, past the frozen waiters holding trays of melting caviar, straight toward the stage. My father gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Victoria stepped back, knocking over her chair. It clattered loudly to the floor. The agent stopped at the base of the stairs. She looked up at them, holding a folded document in her hand. "Arthur Bennett, Victoria Bennett," she said. Her voice wasn't amplified, but in the silence of the room, it carried to every corner. "I am Special Agent Miller with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement of government funds, and filing false statements to a federal agency." Arthur sputtered. This is a gala. You can't do this here. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, sir," Agent Miller said calmly. "You are a flight risk. Please step down from the stage." Victoria tried to bolt. It was a reflex, a desperate animal instinct. She turned toward the backstage exit, her heels clicking frantically on the wood floor. 2 agents were already there, stepping out from behind the curtain. They blocked her path without touching her. Victoria stopped, trapped. She looked back at the crowd, searching for an ally, a lawyer, anyone. But all she saw were hundreds of phones raised in the air, recording her ruin. The agents moved in. They turned my father around. I watched as he placed his hands behind his back. The flash of silver handcuffs glinted under the stage lights. Click. Then Victoria. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks, the fight completely gone. Click. I watched as they were led off the stage, marched down the same center aisle they had walked up in triumph less than an hour ago. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, nobody wanting to be close enough to catch the contagion of their failure. The agents moved in. They turned my father around. I watched as he placed his hands behind his back. The flash of silver handcuffs glinted under the stage lights. Click. Then Victoria. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her cheeks, the fight completely gone. Click. I watched as they were led off the stage, marched down the same center aisle they had walked up in triumph less than an hour ago. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, nobody wanting to be close enough to catch the contagion of their failure. As they passed the camera filming the live stream, my father looked up. He looked straight into the lens. His eyes were wide, terrified, and confused. He was looking for someone to blame. I pressed my thumb against the cool glass of my phone screen, covering his face. "Happy anniversary, Dad," I whispered to the empty taxi. I closed the browser tab. The show was over. The Bennett dynasty hadn't just ended, it had been dismantled, piece by piece, live on the internet. I tapped the driver's partition. "Change of plans," I said. "Take me to my apartment. I have some guests arriving early tomorrow morning." The driver nodded and pulled away from the curb. I sat back, watching the city lights blur past. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't joy. It wasn't sadness. It was the feeling of a heavy weight carried for 29 years finally being set down. The banging on my door started at 5:17 in the morning. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the desperate, rhythmic pounding of people who had never been told no in their entire lives and were terrified that the world had suddenly stopped listening to them. I was already awake. I had been all night, sitting in my kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the brick wall of the alleyway a soft, forgiving pink. I took a sip from my chipped ceramic mug, walked to the door, and slid back the deadbolt. I didn't open it. I just unlocked it and walked back to the kitchen island. I knew they would let themselves in. They always did. The door swung open, hitting the stopper with a violent thud. They spilled into my tiny, rent-controlled apartment like a chemical spill. Arthur, Victoria, and my mother, Evelyn. They looked like the survivors of a shipwreck. Arthur Bennett was still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, but the bow tie was gone, the shirt was unbuttoned to his sternum, and his eyes were rimmed with a red so deep it looked painful. Victoria was worse. Her Versace gown was torn at the hem, probably from when the agents guided her into the SUV, and her mascara had mapped out the topography of her panic across her cheeks. My mother just looked like a ghost, clutching her Chanel bag like a life preserver, shaking in the drafty hallway air. They crowded into my living room. It was almost comical. 3 people who were used to 20-foot ceilings and marble floors were now huddled on my beige IKEA rug, surrounded by the smell of cheap coffee and impending doom. "Fix this," Arthur rasped. His voice was gone, shredded by hours of screaming at lawyers. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You fix this right now, Sarah. You issue a retraction. You tell the press it was a hack, a glitch in the legacy server. You tell them the data is corrupted." Victoria paced the 3 feet of available space between the sofa and the TV, her eyes wild. "We can sue you, you know. Defamation, theft of trade secrets, violation of the NDA you signed when you were 18. I will bury you in litigation so deep you won't see the sun until you're 50. "Stop," my mother whispered, looking at the peeling paint on my ceiling. "Please, just stop." I leaned against the counter, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "Would anyone like coffee? It is the cheap stuff, I am afraid. No barista here." "I don't want your damn coffee," Arthur roared, slamming his hand down on my flimsy side table. The lamp wobbled. "I want my life back. Do you have any idea what you have done? The stock is halted. The bank frozen the lines of credit at 3 a.m. We are bleeding out, Sarah." "I know," I said calmly. I watched the ticker. "Why?" Victoria screamed, spinning on her heel to face me. "Because I didn't let you give Dad a photo album? Because I hurt your feelings? You burned down a billion-dollar company because you have thin skin?" "No," I said. "I burned it down because you are a criminal, Victoria, and Dad is a liar, and I was tired of carrying the water for people who would poison the well." Arthur took a breath, trying to regain his composure. He switched tactics instantly, the master manipulator sliding back into the driver's seat. He softened his face. He stepped closer, hands open, palms up. "Sarah, look," he said, his voice dropping to that warm, fatherly baritone that used to work on me. "We made mistakes. I admit that. The Aspen transfer, it was sloppy. But we can fix it. We pay the fine, we restructure, but we need a united front. Family comes first, always. If you testify against us, you destroy everything your grandfather built. Is that what you want? To be the girl who killed the legacy? I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the eyes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for an accomplice. Grandfather built a hardware store, I said softly. You built a shell game. And I am not going to fix it, Dad. I am the one who broke it. I reached into the drawer next to me and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I slid it across the granite countertop. It was IRS Form 211, Application for Award for Original Information. I didn't just leak the data to the press, Dad. I filed as a whistleblower 3 months ago. I have federal immunity, and under the statute, I am entitled to between 15 and 30% of the recovered funds. Arthur stared at the paper. His face went slack. You turned us in for a bounty? I turned you in because it was the law, I said. The money is just tax. Victoria scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. It's your word against ours. The files are messy. We can claim Sophia Russo manipulated them before she left. We can blame a disgruntled employee. It's circumstantial. I thought you might say that, I said. I picked up my phone. I tapped the screen once. Volume up, I said to the empty room. I pressed play on a voice memo. The audio was crystal clear. It had been recorded 6 months ago in the executive suite, captured by Sophia's phone, which she had accidentally left recording on the desk during her termination meeting. Victoria's voice filled the kitchen. It was cold, arrogant, and undeniable. I don't care about the compliance audit, Sophia. Just cook the books. Move the $12 million to Aspen Ventures and label it consulting. If the feds ask, we buried it in the general ledger. They are too stupid to look that deep. Just do it, or you walk out of here with nothing. The recording ended. The silence in my apartment was absolute. Victoria stopped breathing. Her face turned the color of old paper. She looked at Arthur. Arthur looked at the floor. That recording was the nail in the coffin. It proved intent. It proved knowledge. It proved that it wasn't a mistake. It was a conspiracy. That went to the FBI at 4 this morning, I said, setting the phone down, along with the metadata proving it hasn't been altered. My mother started to cry, soft, heaving sobs into her hands. Sarah, please, he's your father. He's a felon, Mom, I said, and so is Victoria. Arthur looked up. The fight was gone. The manipulation was gone. There was nothing left but a tired old man in a ruined tuxedo. You really hate us this much? He whispered. I don't hate you, I said. I took a sip of my coffee. I just don't need you anymore, and I certainly don't fear you. I glanced at the clock on the microwave. 5:35. You are out on bail, I said, my voice hardening. I read the conditions of your release online. You are strictly prohibited from contacting any witnesses in the case. I am witness number 1. I picked up my phone again and hovered my thumb over the call button. You have exactly 60 seconds to get out of my apartment, I said, or I call Agent Miller and tell her you are here, attempting to intimidate a witness. She will revoke your bail so fast your heads will spin. You will await trial in a holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, and I hear the coffee there is even worse than mine. Arthur flinched. He knew the law. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He turned around slowly, looking like a man walking to the gallows. He took my mother's arm. Come on, Evelyn. Victoria stood her ground for 1 second longer, glaring at me with a hatred that burned. This isn't over, she spat. It was over the minute you told me to use the staff entrance, I replied. Goodbye, Victoria. She spun around and marched out. Arthur and Evelyn followed, dragging their feet. The door clicked shut behind them. I walked over and threw the deadbolt. Click. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and exhaled. The apartment was quiet again. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I wasn't Sarah, the invisible daughter, anymore. I was Sarah Bennett, the woman who had just stared down the devil and made him blink. I walked back to the kitchen, poured the rest of the cold coffee down the sink, and started a fresh pot. I had a lot of work to do. After all, I had a new consulting firm to launch, and I had a feeling my schedule was about to get very full. 6 months later, the biting cold of that December night felt like a distant memory, replaced by the humid, relentless heat of a New York City July. I walked down Fifth Avenue, not as an outcast in an off-rack dress, but as the managing partner of my own boutique forensic consulting firm. The Bennett empire didn't collapse all at once. It eroded, ugly and slow, under the weight of federal scrutiny. The morning headlines had become a daily obituary for my father's legacy. Arthur Bennett was currently confined to his Upper East Side penthouse, wearing a GPS ankle monitor that matched his Italian loafers. His legal team had spent millions trying to get the wire fraud charges dismissed, but the evidence I annotated was too precise. The plea deal was finalized yesterday. He would serve 48 months in a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, followed by a lifetime ban from serving as an officer of a public company. The hardware store history he tried to hide was now the only honest thing attached to his name. Victoria fared far worse. Because she was the signatory on the Aspen Ventures accounts, the Department of Justice went for the throat. They seized the jet, the yacht, and the heated driveway. She filed for personal Chapter 7 bankruptcy last week. The last I heard, she was living in a rented condo in New Jersey, trying to launch a lifestyle blog that nobody was reading. I stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. My phone buzzed in my bag. It wasn't a threat from my family. It was a text from my cousin Ethan. Just walked out of the office for the last time, the message read. The trustees are liquidating the logistics division. I took your advice. Launching the clean tech startup next month. Thanks for showing me the door, Sarah. I smiled and typed back. Proud of you. Dinner is on me next week. The light turned green. I walked past a newsstand on the corner. The New York Post was displayed prominently at eye level. The headline screamed in bold black letters, "The bill comes due. Bennett sentencing set for Tuesday." Below it was a photo of my father and Victoria leaving the courthouse, shielding their faces from the very cameras they used to court. I paused for a fraction of a second. 6 months ago, seeing my name adjacent to that headline would have terrified me. I would have wanted to fix it, to hide it, to protect them. But today, I didn't even break my stride. I didn't buy the paper, I didn't read the article, I already knew the story. I was the one who wrote the ending. The whistleblower award had arrived in my account 3 days ago. The IRS takes a long time, but they pay their debts. 15% of the recovered $12 million plus penalties. It was a check for nearly $3 million. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't buy a jet. I paid off my student loans, bought my apartment so no one could ever bang on my door again, and invested the rest in a scholarship fund for accounting students who want to fight corporate fraud. I turned the corner toward my new office building. The sun hit the glass facade, reflecting the city back at me. I caught my reflection in the window. I looked tired, yes, but I looked free. My name is Sarah Bennett. I used to be the spare part, the invisible daughter, the glitch in the system. Now, I am the system correction. If you are watching this and you are the black sheep of your family, if you are the one they underestimate, the one they silence, the one they leave out of the photos, remember this. They only hide you because they are terrified of what you see. Do not let them buy your silence with a seat at a table that is already rotting. Build your own table, and if you have to, bring the matches. Truth is the only currency that doesn't depreciate. Spend it wisely.